Hello, everybody. I am Michael, CEO and co-founder of Education Ecosystem. I am a Python, Django, and JavaScript engineer. I'm very happy to be talking today at CDCon 2020. My topic for this conference is moving from Jenkins to Jenkins X, scaling and accelerating CI/CD. So this talk is about Jenkins, Jenkins X, code release pipelines, DevOps, continuous integration, and deployment, which are the hottest topics in software development today. For those of you who are not familiar with Jenkins, I'll talk a bit about what Jenkins is, the best use cases for Jenkins, and the suitable environments for Jenkins. I'll also give you some historical context behind Jenkins so you can understand how Jenkins came about and what it was used for initially. Then I'll move on to the challenges posed by Jenkins for engineering teams today. That means the challenges that DevOps teams face when they try to use Jenkins today. After that, I will introduce Jenkins X and explain the architecture of Jenkins X and how you set it up. Then I'll talk a bit about the benefits of Jenkins X compared to Jenkins and other CI/CD tools. So let's get right into it. The most popular CI/CD tools that are used in DevOps today are Travis, Jenkins, Avaya, and Circle CI. Jenkins emerged in the year 2011 from Oracle's Hudson CI tool. Oracle is a strong Java powerhouse, and most of the applications are written in Java, so it's no surprise that Jenkins is also written in Java. And Jenkins runs in a web container. Jenkins is sometimes called the WordPress of continuous integration, and engineers use it to automate their CI/CD pipelines. Jenkins is open source and free, and therefore it is pretty popular. Jenkins supports all version controls and many build automation tools. If you are using Jenkins and you want to use your version control tool like GitLab, GitHub, or Bitbucket, you can use it. So Jenkins does not tie you to any specific version control tool. You can use whatever version control tool you are comfortable with. You can also use any build automation tool you want. Like if you want to use MS Build, if you want to use Ant, if you want to use Nant, if you want to use Maven, if you want to use Shell, if you want to use Groovy, you can use that. If you want to use Make, you can use that as well, right? Now let's go to the Jenkins website. As you can see here, this is the Jenkins website, right? So this is the website for Jenkins, and you can see that it has a strong community support, and there are community support in forums. There's a mailing list, there are meetup groups. So if you have a specific issue, a technical issue with Jenkins, you can ask in those groups. Jenkins also has strong language support for German, English, Spanish, and even Chinese. So if English is not your native language, you can go into the specific groups and ask any questions you have, right? Jenkins is very popular on GitHub. As you see on the GitHub page, it has over 6,000 forks and over 16,000 likes. So if you want to explore Jenkins, if you want to just check out Jenkins, what it is and what it's used for, you can kind of check it out on one of these pages. So here we have a visual representation of a typical Jenkins code pipeline that is used for building, testing, and deployment of code. So as you can see here, it's like a standardized process where we have 3 different development environments that projects normally have. So we have the dev environment, the development environment, we have the staging environment, and we have the production environment. So for each of these environments, what we do is that we set up Jenkins, right? And we set up Jenkins, in the same way, because we want to replicate the same environment, the same processes, just to have the same testing environment, right? We don't want to have different testing and environment in each environment. We want to have the same unique, CI/CD environment, so that when we deploy to production, we don't get any surprises. So this is the typical use case for Jenkins, as you see here in this image, right? And this is how Jenkins normally is used. So we are going to talk next about the challenges that engineering teams face with Jenkins as it is today. So Jenkins is about 10 years old, right? Remember, it was kind of like developed in 2011, and around that time, it was created. The conventional paradigms for DevOps and software development were nothing like we have today. So people at that time were deploying the applications mainly on dedicated servers, right? So they would just buy a dedicated server, server hosting company, and then they would deploy the application on this dedicated service, right? So virtual private service and cloud service were not common at that time. But today, the DevOps world, the hosting of applications, it looks very different, right? Jenkins is not suitable for big teams. It's also not suitable for any large-scale software development. It lacks tools that team members can use for collaborating and testing. It also lacks analytics reporting. Jenkins has customization limitations compared to other CI tools and CD tools. So these are some of the shortcomings of Jenkins, right? And one of the main important things is like when Jenkins was developed 10 years ago, things that we take for granted in the software world, like cloud services like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, they didn't exist at that time. And containerized deployments, with Docker, with Kubernetes, Docker images, etc. All that kind of stuff didn't exist. So Jenkins was not designed with that architecture in mind. It just was not thinking of that at all. So as you can see, Jenkins has some issues, has some limitations, it poses some challenges when big teams want to kind of like have their build their own testing environment, their CI/CD tools, or if you want to use it in a large-scale software development, you're going to face issues, right? And if you are going to use Jenkins you can use Jenkins in AWS or Google Cloud, but it's not going to be a pleasant experience or a smooth and fast experience in doing, in the testing. And this is why actually Jenkins X emerged. Jenkins X is the next generation Jenkins, created for a DevOps environment where we are dealing primarily with cloud services, where we are dealing with containerized deployment. Normally, if engineers want to manage multiple containers, right, that means if you want to manage like multiple Docker, images, you will need to know Kubernetes, right? And you need to know how to run Kubernetes commands. And with Jenkins X, you do not need to know the specific details about Kubernetes, but you can still use Kubernetes, features as if you know Kubernetes, because Jenkins X provides a GUI interface. It also provides a command line, right? So Jenkins X helps you to kind of like deploy multiple containers using Kubernetes without actually knowing this, Kubernetes a lot. And Jenkins X is an improvement of many of the shortcomings of Jenkins, right? So what the guys did is like they looked at Jenkins, all the things that can be improved, and they kind of like came up with Jenkins X, right? So you can imagine Jenkins X as a fast sports car that gets you to where you want to go, and Jenkins more as a limousine that kind of like goes slow, slow, slow. It can get there as well, but it's going to take you a long time. It's going to waste your time. It's going to waste efficiency. And you're gonna, be frustrated with your testing and deployment process, right? So with Jenkins, you can automate pull requests and preview development environment, right? With Jenkins X, you can automate a lot of the commands that before you need to kind of like do manually in Jenkins. Now everything is kind of like pre-set up, and you just kind of like do 2 or 3 things and you're ready to go. So if you had to run 2 or 3 steps in Jenkins to do something, now those 3 steps, they are cut into just 1 single step, right? So let's look at the Jenkins X website. So let's go back and look at the Jenkins X website. So if you want to download Jenkins X, if you want to kind of play with Jenkins X, you can see it here. This is the Jenkins X website. And as you can see here, it looks fresh, but they have a lot of documentation, right? They have a lot of explanation. They have explain, preview environments, how you can do automated pull requests. And they have like a community. The community is not that, big as Jenkins, but it's still not small. And they are very, active on Twitter. So you can check out Jenkins X here if you want to try it out. So now let's look at Jenkins X, the components of Jenkins X, the architecture for Jenkins X, and how we can set up Jenkins X and how we can install it and play with it. So we're just gonna dig a bit deeper into it, like how we can do this, right? So let's go into it. Let me just pull up an image that will show us how Jenkins X actually architecture looks like, right? So if we want to kind of like use Jenkins X, we just download the binaries, and the binaries comes with something called the JS script, right? And that JS script kind of like simplifies the whole work for us, because it's going to simplify the Jenkins X setup. It's going to simplify the creation of Kubernetes clusters, right? So the JS script will do the whole setup for you. As mentioned, it will create new Kubernetes cluster with Jenkins X already included, right? So it's already installed. You don't have to do anything. So they really did it pretty in a smart way, and just to save developers time, right? So Jenkins X works with with every version control tool you want to use, just like Jenkins. So if you are using GitLab, if you're using GitHub, AWS Code Commit, you can still use it with Jenkins X, right? GitHub is, the dominant and most established version control tool. So GitHub is what most people use, right? But it supports other version control tool as well, right? You can interact with Jenkins X, right, using a GUI, or you can interact with it if you feel very comfortable with normal command line tools, right? You can kind of like write your commands and send it. So you don't have to kind of like just use command line. You can just use GUI if you're not interested in understanding the command line tools, right? Even if you do not know how Kubernetes works, you can still run Kubernetes commands, right, and deploy containers. So this is one of the beauty and one of the simplification of Kubernetes that Jenkins X provides, right? So the commands are sent to the JS API, and the JS API sends the command to the Kubernetes API server. Yeah, so the Kubernetes API server like this in the middle of everything, right? And it does the magic, right? So as you can see, we have our Docker containers, containing our microservices or applications, and the rest of the setup that you see, that means like the third part or the last part of this, it just looks similar to Jenkins, right? So we have our build controller, we have our 3 development environments, and the build controller just controls the build. And you can use this with any build tool that you use, automation tool that you want to use, right? We talked about some of those build automation tools before, right? So using Jenkins X is actually pretty straightforward, right? And it kind of like saves you a lot of time compared to Jenkins. So if you look at the setup already compared to Jenkins, you'll save a lot of time. And a lot of the processes in Jenkins that you needed to run manual, like even with the build versions, with the steps you have to take until release, a lot of those processes are kind of like automated, right? So as you can see here, this is how Jenkins X architecture looks like. And if you have any questions, we will talk about those specific questions in the Q&A, right? The other thing you need to remember is that you can use Jenkins with a user interface, any GUI, and you can use Jenkins with a command line, right? And there's a JS API. The JS API takes all of our commands you're telling Jenkins to do, right? And those commands are passed on to the Kubernetes API server, and the Kubernetes API server passes the commands either to the build controller or to the environment, right? Where the commands are to be sent. It can be the development environment, it can be in the staging environment, or it can be in the production environment, right? So now let's talk about the advantages of Jenkins X over Jenkins and why you should move from Jenkins to Jenkins X. So I know that development teams are very hesitant to change, tools that they are working with, that they have set up. that the whole team is using. So Jenkins X is built from the ground up for cloud environments. So if you're using AWS, if you're using Azure, if you are using Google Cloud, Jenkins X is perfect because it was built from the architecture layer, from the design of the Jenkins X, from the teams who were kind of like thinking about it. They thought about cloud deployment, like, you know, so everything that you want to do in a cloud environment with Jenkins X is already pre-set up for you. You can run things faster, unlike Jenkins, right? So the big advantage for Jenkins X is that it's developed from the ground up with cloud deployment in mind, right? So that's one big advantage. Another big advantage that you have with Jenkins X over Jenkins is that Jenkins X was built with intent of distributed deployment. Nowadays, companies don't just launch their applications just on you know, one server; they launch it on multiple servers. One you know, deployment will serve as backup for the other, and Jenkins X supports that easily, right? Another advantage that you have with Jenkins X is Jenkins X supports like naturally and easily containerized deployment. So if you want to kind of deploy multiple Docker containers, right, you can use Jenkins X compared to Jenkins. Jenkins doesn't naturally support containerized deployment. So Jenkins X is built from the ground up with this architecture in mind. And this architecture is actually how software deployment is done today. And it's also how DevOps teams are kind of like working today. So Jenkins X supports, you know, cloud services. So Jenkins X supports distributed deployment. Jenkins X supports containerized deployment, right? So if you're using Jenkins X, you can see that any team using Jenkins X versus Jenkins, and if that team is working like on AWS, if that team is working with containers, if that team is working with distributed deployment, they can save a lot of time, right? And the advantage of also using Jenkins X over Jenkins is normally in a software team, like, you know, be it a distributed team across the world or even in one place, the skills are not the same. Not everybody knows Kubernetes, right? And even those that know Kubernetes, it will be like a waste of time to be running like, you know, Kubernetes commands, like, you know, command line every time because mistakes can be made, right? And the advantage of having Jenkins X is those who are not even, you know, who are not even strong in Kubernetes, you can make them feel comfortable by giving them the Jenkins X GUI, and with that GUI, they can kind of run like Kubernetes commands, right? So they can run their CI/CD process, and they can issue commands to the Kubernetes API, right? Using the GUI, and the commands will go to the JX API, and the JX API sends the commands to the Kubernetes server API, right? So these are some of the advantages of Jenkins X over Jenkins, right? And Jenkins X also makes it easier for people, you know, to collaborate. If there's a big team, they want to kind of like collaborate on their testing, on their deployment, on their builds, and all of that is made easier with Jenkins X, right? So Jenkins X is like a further development. It's a significant improvement of Jenkins, and these are the advantages of using Jenkins X over Jenkins. And if you are thinking about whether, you know, you should move to Jenkins X or you should stick with Jenkins, we are gonna kind of like talk about that, you know, in the next slide, and we can discuss that more also in the Q&A. And now to to the next slide, and you know, where I'll just recap things. You know, why you should kind of like move to Jenkins X if you're already, you know, running on Jenkins X. If your CI/CD team, if your company is running on Jenkins, like, you know, one of the ways you can convince the whole team and the company to move to Jenkins X are some of the benefits, you know, advantages that we discussed, you know, before. But if you are thinking about, you're not sure, I think that the advantages and, you know, the cost savings and the time savings, it outweighs any kind of like consideration, because Jenkins X is really a significant improvement of Jenkins, right? It's not just a tiny, small improvement. Sometimes, like, you know, CI/CD tools are released and they are just like, you know, a tiny improvement. And because Jenkins X is a significant improvement, they didn't just call it like, you know, they could have called just a higher version of Jenkins, but because, like, you know, this is like really a new product, this is like really a completely game changer, it was called Jenkins X. And the X meaning that it's actually They want to showcase it. They want to show that this is like really not the same as Jenkins as you know it, but it's something much better. It's something like, you know, significant improvement, right? So you can, you know, I'll make my presentation available if you want to kind of use it to kind of like convince your team to move to Jenkins X. And if you want to convince your team that Jenkins X is really easy to use, it will save you time, it will save your money, it will, you know, let all team members that you have in the engineering team be more confident using Jenkins X, right? And just to convince your team that the learning curve is pretty fast, right? So if you have to move your team from Jenkins to Jenkins X, there's gonna be some resistance, right? And you need to prepare yourself for it because nobody wants to learn new stuff, like, you know, change what they know, change like tools that they are running, change processes they have set up. They don't want to do that. They want to kind of like keep the systems they are running so that they don't have to kind of spend time learning something new. So if you are going to convince your team to move from Jenkins to Jenkins X, you will need to do some convincing, right? And I think this architecture you see here is really kind of like a good image to kind of like use to showcase people how Jenkins X works and how kind of like simplified it is to work with Jenkins X, to work with like, you know, Kubernetes and use Kubernetes kind of like, you know, control containers, launch containers, deploy them, shut them down, etc. So the architecture of Jenkins X, this image actually showcases how easy it is and how smooth it is to work with Jenkins X in a team, right? Now, if your team is using other CI/CD tools, I will surely advise you to kind of check out Jenkins X. It's really, really nice CI/CD tool. And compared to Travis, compared to Avaya, compared to CircleCI, this is a significant improvement, all right? If your team is not using any CI/CD tool at all, and you are thinking of, you know, using a CI/CD tool, I would suggest to use Jenkins X and not Jenkins, because like then your team will kind of save a lot of time. Don't start with Jenkins, start right away with Jenkins X, right? Because I believe what is going to happen is over time, they will stop developing Jenkins and they will focus on basically mainly Jenkins X. And I mean, they haven't mentioned that now. I haven't read it anywhere, but I think that's going to happen because they are not going to provide two CI/CD tools at the same time. They are going to kind of like, you know, combine everything into one, and that will be Jenkins X, which is going to replace Jenkins. So that's it, and I'm going to be around for the Q&A session. If you have any questions, you can kind of ask me, all right? And I'll also leave my contact details here. This is a website of my company, Education Ecosystem, and this is my email, and this is my Skype. If you want to reach out to me, the best way is email. I prefer email. And in case we need to talk, we can jump on Skype, right? So these are my contact details. I'm gonna stick around a bit for Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can just type it into the chat, and I'll answer them while we go through the Q&A. Thank you very much.